Good to see everybody tonight as usual, and hope our discussion as we begin in 1 Peter 2, down about verse 9, will be beneficial, encouraging, helpful. And as always, feel free to jump in, participate as you will, make any comments. Don't feel like you're interrupting, just jump in anytime that you got a thought, add to the discussion. When we left off, we were talking about the description that's given to Christians there in verse 9, and we had discussed the chosen generation, royal priesthood, and I think that's kind of where we left off when he was describing it as a holy nation. But he gives four terms there to describe Christians: that you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people, and the reason being that you should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. So what we're talking about tonight, at least to start with, the people of God, or the people who had become the people of God, and how thankful they should be to be Christians, to be children of God, and how they should conduct themselves, because you're going to talk a little bit later, next verse 2, about abstain from fleshly lust and so forth and so on. So he's going to talk about how they should live, how they should conduct themselves as Christians. So this is kind of where we are. So we discussed, I think, most of the. I think we were discussing peculiar people. As a matter of fact, I think when we left class, it didn't mean that we're oddballs and that sort of thing. One of the translations, or one of the commentators say, is talking about a people for his possession. In other words, we have been bought. We've been bought with a price. We've been redeemed. We've been bought with the precious blood of the Lamb. So he has secured us. He has secured us as a possession. We are his own, a people that therefore that belong to him and nobody else. And as a result of that, that clause that you should show forth the praise of him who has called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. So you and I, then, one of the reasons, or one of the things that should be, I guess you'd say, something that we're conscious of, is that we need to be thankful all the time that we are Christians. We are so blessed. We're so blessed to be a Christian. And Barnes, in his commentary, talks about the word praises, and he said it properly means good quality or excellence, meaning talking about God's goodness, God's wondrous deeds, and as a result of that, for what he's done for us, then we need to turn around and praise God. We sing a song, I think sometimes, Israel, you probably know the number, "To God be the glory, great things he hath done." And this is kind of along the theme here about that we need to show that praise, need to show that thankfulness for his excellence, for his goodness, for his mercy, his grace, his love, all the things that he's done for you and me. So I think that's kind of summation of that verse 9 about praising him. And then the part about calling us out of darkness into his marvelous light, so you can see the contrast, darkness being the emblem of ignorance, the emblem of sin, misery, lost, undone, without God, without hope, and he has called us out of that into his marvelous light. Matter of fact, we've been translated. I think it's in Colossians 1:13. I should have just kind of popped in my brain there. That what does that say? Israel, I lost my train of thought there.
Out of the power of darkness into the kingdom of his dear Son.
The kingdom is dear Son. So with darkness being the emblem of ignorance and sin and so forth, then you have light being the opposite, that it's a beautiful representation of the state, the state that you and I are now in, that it's a really beautiful representation of the contrast between the state that we were in prior to becoming a Christian, and now we're in the light of Jesus Christ, or we are in Christ. We're in the kingdom, as Israel's pointed out in Colossians 1 and verse 13. So the reference here seems to be those that were pagans, those that were, well, it could be Gentiles or the pagans, those that were not Christians, and the great change that had taken place. Barnes makes a comment. He says, the change, let me just read this statement, the change in conversion is often so great and so rapid, the views and feelings are so different before and after conversion that it seems like a sudden transition from midnight to noon. In other words, what you were before and what you are now. You remember the Apostle Paul was so bad that it took Barnabas, I think, to bring him to the apostles because they still thought, well, he was this really bad guy. And but you can see the change in the Apostle Paul. He described himself as the chiefest sinners, how he persecuted the church, all the bad things that he did. He wasn't worthy to be called an apostle, he said. But of course, he said, I outworked them all and became the great apostle that we know him to be. But you can see the change that took place. He said the group that he tried to destroy, and now he preaches the gospel that he tried to destroy at one time. So it's talking about the change from darkness to light, and he described it as marvelous or wonderful. Would be another word to describe that. So, in all cases of genuine conversion, it's true that each one can say that he's been called from a state in which his mind was dark into that which is light. So that's in general what he's describing, I think, there about the transition from being in darkness, lost. Some people say undone, not converted, in a bad state, unpardoned, and now you're just in a totally different state. Basically, is what he's saying there. Any thoughts before we get into verse 10? All right, so now he's going to describe these people, these pagans, and there's several references, and I'm going to have some of you guys read two or three statements here to show you the difference. And this was as it were, kind of forecast in the Old Testament. There's several places in the Old Testament that indicate what he's talking about here in 1 Peter 2 and verse 10, and we're going to turn to that in just a second. But it said, which in time past were not a people. They were not a people. So in other words, formerly, they were not regarded as the people of God. And this is an allusion to several statements in the Old Testament, one of which is in Hosea 2 and verse 23, which reads, and I will have mercy upon her that had not obtained mercy, and I will say to them which were not my people, thou art my people, and they shall say, thou art my God. So in Hosea, it seems to be saying that there were some in Israel that would be followers of his. They were not at one time. They were considered outcasts or lost and so forth. That they had rejected the Savior. And Peter kind of refers to the same thing. Mainly probably those that were Gentiles who had never been recognized as the people of God. And I don't know if this is a prophecy of what was going to occur, but Hosea 2 and verse 23 is very similar to what he says here in 1 Peter 2 and verse 10. And the two or three verses I want to look at just real quick. Israel, read, if you would, Romans 9, 25 and 26. Bill, if you would, read Ephesians 2, 11 through 13. I'll give you guys a chance to turn to it. Tommy, read Galatians 3, 28. And Lord, read Acts 2 and verse 39. All these referred kind of the same kind of thing that Peter talks about here and what Hosea, I think, was saying in Hosea 2 and verse 23. Do you have that one, Israel?
Yes, sir. As he saith also in Hosea, I will also call them my people, which were not my people, and her beloved, which was not beloved. And it shall come to pass that in the place where it was said unto them, Ye are not my people, there shall they be called the children of the living God.
Okay, so Paul refers to almost the same thing that Peter does, and the word osi there, I think, refers to Hosea, right? So he's quoting, Paul's quoting is what he said in Hosea 2 and verse 23, and Peter seems to be saying about the same thing that that Paul was saying there in Romans 9. All right, Bill, do you have Ephesians 2, 11 through 13?
Therefore remember that you, once Gentiles in the flesh, who are called uncircumcision by what is called the circumcision made in the flesh by hands, that at that time you were without Christ, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel, and strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. But now in Christ Jesus, you who once were far off have been drawn near by the blood of Christ.
Okay, thank you, Bill. And as a matter of fact, when we get in that next verse, in 1 Peter 2 and verse 11, he uses the same term that Bill found there in Ephesians 2, strangers. Stranger, in other words, you were strangers. I beseech you, you strangers. You were strangers, you were pilgrims, but now you're the people of God. And so they had not obtained mercy, but now they had obtained mercy. All right, Tommy, Galatians 3:28, if you would.
There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither bond nor free, there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus.
All right, so he broke down that middle wall of partition. It's for everybody now, right? So the Gentiles are included, and so those that were not the people of God at one time, they are the people of God now. All right, Acts 2 and verse 39 it uses a little different expression, but I think it's referring to the same kind of thing that that Peter talked about. That Peter talked about on the in the great sermon there in Acts in Pentecost on Acts chapter 2. Lord, Acts 2:39.
The promises unto you and to your children and to all that are afar off, even as many as the Lord our God shall call.
Okay, so these strangers and pilgrims and foreigners, now they have an opportunity, as Tommy read in Galatians 3:28. So now they have the same opportunity to be called the children of God as the original children of God. So now there's no difference. There's no difference in them.
You know, Peter was preaching primarily to the Jews at that time.
Yep,
When,
absolutely.
I doubt that very many in the audience really realized what he said.
Yep.
Those that did pull on.
In other words, he said, yeah, it wasn't just for them now, it's for those that are far off. Whoever would be included in those that are far off. Absolutely. And which had not, you have a thought? Which had not obtained mercy. They had not obtained mercy at that point. All of these that we had talked about, at one time they were strangers, pilgrims, had not obtained mercy. That is, they had been living unpardoned. They didn't have the knowledge of God that they needed. They had not been forgiven, but now they have been forgiven, and so they are now the people of God. And then verse 11. So, dearly beloved, I beseech you, strangers and pilgrims. In other words, this is kind of what they were at the time, but even in a sense now, they're in a sense strangers and pilgrims, not in the sense that they're not part of the people of God. They are, but he seems to be turning the page just a little bit to tell them that they're not to live as the people of the world now. In other words, you are strangers and pilgrims and foreigners at one time. You've been redeemed. You've been bought back. You're pardoned now. So how are you going to live in life at this point in time? So uses the term strangers and pilgrims. And strangers, of course, carries with it the idea of foreigners or sojourners. And pilgrim, of course, carries with it the idea of something that's a wanderer, something that's transitory. You have no permanent place to live. Somebody, for example, that will be traveling a long way just to worship God or to try to be in harmony with what God wants you to do. In other words, you don't have a permanent dwelling place. what he's trying to get into at this point, I think, when he the next verse or two, and it'll make more sense when we get into verse 12 and following, is since you've been called out of darkness into His marvelous light, how are you going to live? How are you going to conduct yourselves? In other words, are you thinking in terms of this is your permanent home? Are you thinking of there's a better place above, that our citizenship is in heaven, as he says in Philippians 3 and verse 20? Or what are you going to do about the condition now that you're in? You've been bought with a price. Glorify God, give Him the credit, give Him the glory, and so forth. And I think this is the point that he's going to try to make in the next verse or two. So you're, in a sense, you're still pilgrims and strangers, foreigners, in the sense that you've got to realize that this is not your home. This is not where it's going to end up, I guess, is what he's going to eventually try to get across to them. So Barnes makes 2 or 3 good comments here. Let me just read this, and then I want to look at 3 or 4 verses that kind of point out the same thing. He says they should not regard the earth as their home. In other words, you're a stranger, a pilgrim, in the sense that this is not your permanent home. It is where we live, but it's not your permanent home. The second thing is that they should not seek to acquire permanent possessions as if they were to remain here. In other words, what did Jesus say to the rich young ruler in Luke chapter 18? What was his view? Jesus is all about possessions, right? He's all about possessions. He had much. He went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. Jesus said, "Go sell what you have, give to the poor, and come follow me." He wasn't willing to do that. So I think what Barnes is saying here is this is the attitude that we should have, that whatever we have to give up to have the eventual home that we want, not the home that this is not a permanent place. We're just passing through, in a sense. I think that's what he's talking about. We're sojourners. You and I don't have a permanent dwelling place here. We do in the sense that we live in a certain place, but he's trying to make a point that they should not allow the attachments in this world or the arrangements to be made in such a way that this is what it's all about. And I think that's the reason he's still calling them strangers and pilgrims. What did Solomon say about this in the first couple of chapters of Ecclesiastes? About he was so miserable. He had everything that a person could possibly want, all of the amenities of life. He said, I didn't withhold myself from anything that I wanted. But he said he eventually came to the conclusion that he was going to die, and who was going to possess it? Somebody else, right? So I think what he's saying here is pretty much the same thing. That somebody else is going to live in our house eventually. Somebody else is going to drive the car that we're driving, or whatever it might be. So what he's saying is, don't get so attached to things here. Lay up your treasures in heaven, as Jesus said, where moth and rust don't corrupt, thieves don't break through and steal, and so forth and so on. Jesus gave that advice even before Peter and Paul and others had talked about that. So even while we're engaged in the necessary things of life, our jobs, taking care of our family, and all of these kinds of things, we need to set our affections on things above. And that's what he said in Colossians 3 and verse 1, I believe it is, and in Lord's favorite verse, Philippians 4 and verse 8, to think about those things that are something other than these things that we think are so permanent here. Think on things that are good and wholesome and honest and true and of good report and so forth and so on. So that's the way that we need to live our lives. And he's talking about how to live as Christians. Well, we mentioned Colossians 3 and verse 1, what Paul said about setting your affections on things above, not on things on the earth. What Jesus said, lay up treasures in heaven. And about the rich, when he asked the question there in Matthew 19 about how hard it was for the rich to go to heaven, you remember the exchange there. How hard was it for a rich man to go to heaven? He didn't say it was impossible, but it was nearly impossible. But Paul took it a step further in 1 Timothy 6. What did Paul say? Those that will be rich, those that are looking that way, might not be rich, but in other words, that's where we're setting our affections. That we want more. We're setting our affections on those things that are of a worldly nature. We desire to be rich and so forth and so on. And what he's saying here, I think, is that should not be our goal. The things in this world are transitory. Everything is going to pass away. Matter of fact, Peter describes in 2 Peter 3 that it's going to all eventually be burned up. So when you look at it that way, it's going to be somebody else's eventually on this earth. Somebody's going to live on our little plot of ground or in our house or whatever. But eventually, nobody is. Go ahead. Yeah, Don, yeah. Go ahead.
Me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Proverbs 23, I was going to read 2 verses.
Okay. Absolutely.
It says, Proverbs 23:4, labor not to be
Yep.
rich, cease from thine own wisdom. Wilt thou set thine eyes upon that which is not? For riches certainly make themselves wings, they fly away as an eagle toward heaven.
Yeah, they don't last, do they? Kind of transitory. 1929 kind of found that in our country and other times as well. Donald, do you have a thought? I thought,
He tells us we have treasures in heaven with moth does corrupt. They got a monument of Abraham Lincoln in Washington, D.C., I guess, made of plastic. The sun is decaying it.
Yeah.
So I imagine they're going to put it back. Platinum and titanium is the toughest metal on this planet. So I imagine that's what they'll go back with.
Yeah.
At least that's what the Columbia is made of.
Mm-hmm.
You know how you temper metal is you heat one piece of it up, then lay the other piece on the coal, and the molecules in it transfers so make it tough. The part that the molecules are taken out of, you can bend it with your hand.
Mm-hmm.
Before you better not try that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, good point. So you can see that all of these things, man does so many things to just possess things and to keep it, it's mine and so forth and so on. But it's so temporal, it's so transitory. And some of us found out that the hurricanes and others can take it away pretty quick too, tornadoes and other things. So we need to be looking above, that's what he's saying. And then the last part there in verse 11, he says, abstain from fleshly lust. In other words, the desires, passions that we may have. Of course, there's quite a discussion about that in Ephesians 5:19 through 21, the works of the flesh and so forth and so on. So he's saying, abstain from these things, abstain from fleshly lust. So as a sojourner in a land, or a pilgrim as it were, that we don't give ourselves to the sensual appetites and indulgences that so many others do in this life, I think is what he's saying. He said, because they war against the soul, which war against the soul. There's a constant battle, of course, and the Bible has a lot to say about this, between the flesh and the spirit. And even Paul talked about that, the things that I shouldn't do, you kind of have a desire to do, and the things I know I should do, I don't. He said there's a constant battle between that. So you and I need to deny ourselves. Jesus even said that to forsake these things that are temporal in nature, and set our thoughts and minds on those things that are spiritual in nature. Any thought before getting to verse 12? Anybody? Jump in if you want. All right, so now he's still continuing the thought about how to live. He says, abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul. And so now instead of the negative thing, in other words, eliminate the negative things, now he's going to kind of flip it over to the positive thing, where he says, having your conversation honest. A conversation there, most think that's talking about your conduct, your manner of life, not just your conversation, but your manner of life. He says a lot about that. In Philippians 1:27 is one verse. In other words, the way that we should live is because we've been bought with a price. we're to lead upright and consistent lives, being honest, truthful, and so forth. Kind of like most politicians, right? Just tell the truth and be honest. And you don't know anybody like that, is there, that don't tell the truth, right? And don't.
Swain,
And he.
Bruce Swain, the swear.
Okay. I said, which man?
Speak of truth.
Yeah. So your conversation, he says, your conversation, manner of life among the Gentiles, so the pagans, by whom you are surrounded and who will certainly observe your conduct. What he says is that, as he would say in Romans 13:13 and other places, another verse, 1 Thessalonians 4:12, that you might walk honestly toward them that are without. So they see what we stand for, they see our convictions and so forth, and they may be persuaded to want to be the kind of inquire and want to be a Christian as well, where they see the way that we act, the way that we talk, the way that we conduct ourselves in this life. Even though they see you a certain way. Notice what it says here in that same verse, that whereas they speak against you as evildoers, in other words, they think you're a certain way that you're not, is what he's saying here. That the word in what is he talking about there, referring to time, meaning that at the very time when they speak against you in this manner, they may be silenced because of the way that you actually live. In other words, they perceive that you're a certain way, but you're not. Well, what did Jesus say about how to act? You remember right after the Beatitudes in Matthew 5, down about verse 11 and 12, when men shall speak evil against you, say all manner of evil and so forth and so on, he uses an expression that's kind of hard, Lord, for me to get my arms around.
Rejoice.
Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so persecuted they the prophets which were before you, and so forth and so on. That is a difficult. Yeah, just glad, but take that adjective out of there. Not glad, not exceeding glad, or I guess it'd be an adverb. Exceeding modified glad. And then in 1 Peter 2. Verses 19 and 20, he says something very similar. We won't turn and read that, but he's talking about how to act and how to conduct ourselves when people say bad things about it. Matter of fact, it referring to Jesus there in 1 Peter 2, 19 through 21, and following down through about verse 24, 25, that when they said bad things about him, he didn't speak back. When they reviled him, he didn't revile. He didn't say these bad things toward them, which he could have and be justified in it, but he didn't do that. And he said, and he left us an example as to act when those kind of things happen. Very difficult thing to do. As a matter of fact, Jesus in Matthew 5, toward the end of that chapter, talks about love your enemies and bless them that persecute you, and those that do evil against you, and so forth and so on. Be perfect as your heavenly Father is in heaven is perfect. In other words, talking about that particular thing about how God saw it, that He sent His Son to die for all these rebels and all the people that was going to hate His Son. And what He's saying is that we need to conduct ourselves even in the midst of very difficult situations when people antagonize us and say bad things about us and so forth. They speak against us as evildoers and so forth and so on, and we're not. But it's not easy to do sometimes. You turn the other cheek kind of thing that Jesus will say. Go ahead.
That's right. It just goes. This is a proof that the Bible and God, everything is, not evolved with a community. There's no way a man would come up with a system of fighting spiritually like this.
That. Yep.
They would not rejoice and be exceedingly glad for being mistreated for righteousness' sake.
Eye for eye, tooth for tooth.
That's the way they're going to do it. And I know more and more the younger generation has to be shown ways that the Bible and Christianity is from God. And when you think of how God uses the things that it's not natural for us to do in order to live.
Yeah.
And it does make us stronger. But it's just I enjoy finding things like that prove
yeah,
Like,
yeah. Well, Keith,
It's a key, use that as his, what you say, when he didn't return the evil.
yeah, yeah.
Evil being done to him.
Yeah.
Stay peaceably.
yeah,
That would be a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
People calling you names and beating you, throwing you in jail.
yeah.
and he won the battle.
Yeah.
So,
And all kind of things like that, like, and just kind of popped in my mind when the Lord said what he did. Somebody compels you to go a mile, go within twain, and several other things that Jesus made mention of that's very similar. In other words, go beyond. I think Keith had talked about that one time before, the same kind of thing, where it's on a higher plane. It's like he talks about adultery, but he says, it's not just adultery. Don't look on a woman to lust after her. If you've done, you commit adultery with her in your heart. And so, in other words, it's a different level, right? It's different plane. And this is what he's talking about. So they speak evil against you, but notice what he says, but they may, by your good works, which they shall behold, glorify God in the day of visitation. In other words, it has a different effect on them now. In other words, they're saying some really bad things about you. You don't retaliate, an eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, burning for burning, foot for foot, and so forth and so on. So you return good. I think something said about that in Romans 12, isn't it? That
Romans 12:17, render not being evil for evil.
yeah,
1 Peter 3:9,
Yeah.
1 Thessalonians 5:15.
yeah,
They all say the same thing.
yeah, same thing. And so somebody says something bad about you, you return good for evil, which is, again, not an easy thing to do. I'm not saying that it is. Tom, you had a thought.
Well, I don't hear the story of a Bible school teacher telling about him coming home from a football game and somebody was telling him what he did wrong and everything, and cussing him, and then when he got done, he said, "Thank you."
Yeah.
I still remember that after.
Oh, who was that? Let's see. Yeah, Romans, the one I was trying to think was Romans 12:21. Be not overcome with evil, but overcome evil with good, which is
What do you mean by day of visitation?
not either.
Day of visitation.
That Barnes says that there's a lot of disagreement about what that phrase actually is. Let me just read what he says. There are four different things. He said, all right, let me find my thought here. I said, many different opinions have been entertained of the meaning of this phrase in the day of visitation, some referring to it as the day of judgment, some to times of persecution, in other words, how you act when you are persecuted. The third thing is, let's see, let me find my thought. Some to the destruction of Jerusalem, that's the third one, and some to the time when the gospel was preached among the Gentiles. What Barnes thinks that was the latter, that what he's saying, the time of visitation. Let me just read another statement too, because he explains it better than I can, Bill. He says the visitation here referred to is undoubtedly that of God. In other words, God is the one doing the visiting. Okay, so just what does it mean? Is it the end of the world, the judgment scene? Is it Jerusalem? Is it that he brought the gospel to everyone there, and so forth and so on? He says the reference here of visitation refers to God, and the reference is to some time when he would make a visitation to people for some purpose, and when the fact that the Gentiles had narrowly inspected the conduct of Christians would lead them to honor him. The only question is, to what visitation of that kind the apostle referred? The prevailing use of the word in the New Testament would seem to lead us to suppose that the visitation referred to was designed to confer favors rather to inflict punishment. And then he goes on to say, and he kind of sums it up this way, Bill, he says, this seems to me to be its meaning here. In other words, it denotes that let me read this statement here. And to have been familiarly used by Christians to denote God's coming to people to bless them, to pour out his Spirit upon them, to revive religion. This seems to me to be its meaning here. And if so, the sense is that when God appeared among people to accompany the preaching of the gospel with saving power, the result of the observed conduct of Christians would be to lead those around them to honor him by giving up their hearts to him. In other words, as God would visit, in other words, these were people that were not God's people at one time. Now they are God's people. Well, when did that start? Well, Acts 2 and so forth and so on. So what Barnes thinks it has reference to is when the gospel comes, God visited the Jews and eventually the Gentiles with the coming of the gospel, the saving power, Romans 1:16, and that was when he visited, that he's talking about here in the day of visitation. And as a result of that, these people who had nothing to do with God and so forth, they would see your conduct, my conduct, and as a result, they would want to glorify God because of seeing the difference in what a Christian is as opposed to not. And I don't know whether that's the statement, but he says there's a lot of disagreement as to what it actually means. So
God come to visit each and every one of us at some point in time in our lives.
yeah, absolutely,
We wouldn't be here in this church.
absolutely.
And what converted each and every one of us?
Love the brother.
Somebody led us to Christ.
Right here,
Yeah, somebody in this church led us to Christ.
right
When
here.
your dad led you to Christ. Now, my mother led me to Christ. And if I didn't see Christ living in her, would I have come to Christ? Probably not.
Yeah.
So that's the visitation.
The visitation, right.
Talking about here, God's gonna come to visit every one of us.
Yeah,
We gotta make a decision.
yeah, and I think that's kind of what he's talking about there. Yeah,
I envy what he does. Be a football coach, and we've all watched TV and watched the language that some of these coaches use. And to have a man like that teaching young men how to be men,
absolutely.
I envy that.
Absolutely.
Because
That's
it's
what that's what it is.
it's a blessing. Those guys will always know that you taught them.
Absolutely.
Every one of them will. At some point in their life,
Yep.
if God ever comes to visit, they'll remember what you taught them.
Yeah. That's what I tell Keith, that his reward's going to come down the road. It may be 10, 15, 20, 30 years from now. But the impact that he has on those kids, teach them how to live, not just the X's and O's of football and how to block and tackle and run, throw and all that, but how to conduct themselves, how to live and so forth and so on. And he's a great role model for those kids. And
That's
I
my
wonder where you
point.
got that from.
I don't know. He picked it up somewhere.
You know, sir?
He got it from John Wooden.
Who did John Wooden get? Who got it from John Wooden?
I don't know. Well, I picked it up something from John Wooden.
Okay, you can run.
Yeah,
with
Yeah,
That's the epitome of reincarnation.
talk about
Explain that the other time. I'm bad about opening my mouth.
talk about
There's nobody else in there like that.
talk about what Henry's saying about language and everything. That's the reason that when I read different books, I read several books on John Wooden and just admired him so much of what he did, not just the winning, but the way he went about it. And they're totally different from guys like Bobby Knight, for example, and so many others I can name. I shouldn't get into that. But I remember Bill Walton and others would say that about the worst thing that and when John Wooden really got upset, he'd say, "Goodness gracious sakes alive!" You know, that was his cussing. You know, "Goodness gracious sakes alive." So anyway, they knew they were in trouble when he said that. You know,
Brother, playoffs. They ain't won a game.
yeah. I might get upset with him and say, "Run it again." So, anyway, there you go.
I wouldn't be there if Keith wasn't the way he is.
Well, there's no call. Henry talked about that, but there's, we had the philosophy years ago that if we had to win that way, we weren't going to win. And I had a defensive coach, Bud Pygott, who was just great, and he had the same philosophy that I did about those kind of things. Well, just about everybody that I coached with, we made it clear. Keith makes it clear to the coaches there's not going to be any foul language on the field during games, and we're going to treat officials right. We're going to treat the players right. We're not going to cuss. We're not going to berate them, and that sort of thing. And you don't hear any cussing out there at practice. We'll be out there laboring for 2.5 hours, and everybody's tired and everything else, but you don't hear any bad language. So that's a credit to him and and the program that he's installing and building. There's no Christian elect.
God teach kids to
Yeah.
everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
To us in one way or another. Like
Absolutely.
My mother was the one.
Same thing. Yeah.
You led him, but,
Yeah,
but God comes to us and visits every one of us, and
Yep.
if we're not,
that's right.
if we haven't had somebody to
Yep.
guide us.
That's a good way to put it, the day of visitation,
Yeah.
you know, absolutely. Good point, excellent point. All right, then verse 13, let's see, Bill's fixing to get us. So then he says, he's still teaching them how to live, how to conduct themselves. And again, there's a reason he mentions what he did here. In other words, he's trying to show that Christians are different, and when you act differently, then people respond to that in a positive way. So the next thing he mentions is, after abstaining from fleshly lusts and so forth and so on, and live right, return good for evil and so forth, submit yourselves to every ordinance of man, notice it, for the Lord's sake, whether to king as supreme, or to governors, them that are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers, so forth and so on. For this is the will of God, verse, that with well-doing, notice it, you may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men. So he's continued the same thought about, in other words, we live in such a way to affect others in a positive way. And I think that's the point that he's making here in the 6 or 8 verses there, the 3 or 4 that we read, and then these verses that we'll get into next week. But that's what he's saying. The effect that you're going to have on other people is the way that you live, the way that you conduct yourself, your conversation, your manner of life. And this is just one other thing about obeying the law and so forth. He says, submit yourselves to every order of man, obeying the law of the king, the governors, and so forth and so on, that are put there for the punishment of evildoers and for the praise of those that do well and so forth. And Romans 13 and other places point out that same thing. Thank you, guys. Appreciate your good comments and your good thoughts. Appreciate that. See you next week again.
I am so